And Montenegro is a wonderful Amaro because it's got this beautiful kind of beguiling sweetness that hits you as soon as you put it on the palate. That immediately kind of goes away and is replaced by this very elegant bitterness.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Decoding Cocktails podcast. I'm your host, Chris LeBeau. The goal of this show is to understand the inner workings and evolution of mixology, hospitality, and community. As I further my own knowledge of the field, I'm inviting you to join me. You'll hear me interview people from around the industry about their work and beliefs. If you like what you hear, the best way to keep up is to subscribe via the podcast app you use. And if you think others will like this, I invite you to share an episode or write a review. Your words help grow our audience. And you can keep up with the latest news via our newsletter, Cocktail Confidential, or see what we're working on via Instagram. And please reach out. I'd enjoy hearing what you liked, learned, and what else you'd like to see me dig into. So let's get into it. What's happening, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Decoding Cocktails podcast. My guest today is Tad Carducci. He is a lifelong bartender, award-winning mixologist. He's an author, educator, drinks consultant, and a self-described bon vivant. Tad has over 30 years of experience in the hospitality industry, and for many years, one of his primary things was a partner of Tippling Brothers, which was a New York-based beverage consultancy that operated from 2008 to 2017. Part of that was having a bar called the Tippler, which is was described as a cavernous cocktail bar under Manhattan's famed Chelsea Market. As a result of his time with Tippling Brothers, Tad, working in part during that as the beverage director of the Mercadito Restaurant Group, also co-authored a book called A Lime and a Shaker, Discovering Mexican-Style Cocktails. Tad has had his work featured in Food and Wine Magazine, The New York Times, New York Post, Bon Appetit, and many more. Also, as I was kind of throwing this thing together, saw that he was very recently recognized at the Tales of a Cocktail as one of the country's top brand ambassadors. So congrats to Tad for that. Starting in 2018 until 2020, he served as the North American brand ambassador for Amaro Montenegro, but now represents Grupo Montenegro, the holding company, as the Director of Outreach and Engagement. If you want to see what Tad is up to, you can follow him on Instagram at Tad Tippling, Tippling. Tad was just, a very generous spirit, but just an incredible fountain of knowledge. No matter what I threw at him, he knew exactly where to run with it, and the answers were rich and fun. It was a very warm-hearted conversation, which I was very grateful for. From a practical use standpoint, we are going to get way deep into bitter liqueurs in this case. And so things to think about are aperitivi as well as amari. So in this regard, we're going to talk about red bitter liqueurs, things like Campari and Aperol, as well as one of the brands that Tad represents, Select, which at least in the Midwest is a little bit newer to the market. We're also going to talk about amari as a category too, which is very, very helpful to think about, Montenegro, which he works with, but also thinking about that compared to Fernet Branca or Amaro Chiocharo, helping people to think about things along the case of a spectrum. How do you kind of soften these bitter liqueurs up? Where do they plug in? It was even fun at one point. Tad was just saying, you know what? He goes, something like Montenegro, of which he's obviously a very big fan. He's like, so many cases I just tell people, kind of just like, I don't know, often like add a quarter or a half ounce to something. He talks about that with margaritas, espresso martinis, bigger pours of Montenegro and tonic. You guys, Montenegro and tonic water, whoa, it is, seriously, it's really good. And even kind of digs into the fact that so Amaro, Montenegro, or just Amaro in general, and tonic are both bitter things, despite tonic having some sugar added to it to sweeten it. That he talks about when you bring two bitter things together, it actually can really kind of help lessen the bitterness, which I hadn't really thought about before. Tad is someone who chased education a whole lot and is always learning, but talked about that there's a great part in the interview when he talks about that he realized that while the education was important, he was chasing it because he was chasing approval to prove that he could do the thing, as opposed to, did he have to have the credentials? No, but he felt like that validated his doing it. And one of his mentors was like, you're already doing it. Don't worry about it. The other universal thing that he said he comes across everywhere in the industry, which makes sense and I feel very deeply at times when I'm working, is that he says people who love this industry are very into pleasing and making people happy. And obviously that can happen to an unhealthy level version of things, but is something that I know that I feel very much when I'm with a guest or even hosting friends. And I need to remember to enjoy my own party when I'm hosting friends. But yeah, it was a lot of fun to interview Tad. The interview just flew by, and I think you guys will enjoy it. So my interview with Tad Carducci. Tad, thanks so much for taking some time today to talk. I appreciate it.
Chris, thanks for having me. I appreciate you asking me to be here.
Wonderful. So when I think about where to start today, you've, as I remember seeing published, and it's easy just to see, you've been in the industry for a long minute now. And for many people, they might start in the industry kind of as a default, or like they're just biding their time. But is there a moment you remember feeling called to or deciding you were going to commit to this industry? Is there a moment or moments you remember?
Absolutely. I mean, there are several moments, but there's one in particular that I do remember. I mean, I had been in the industry in some form or another in hospitality, and whether that was tossing pizzas or flipping burgers or waiting tables, or as a bartender and restaurant manager, things like that. But throughout my 20s and 30s, I was an actor, and for me, just like, similar story to so many others, working in the hospitality industry was a means to an end. It allowed me to pursue acting. But as I got further and further into different facets of the industry, I became more transfixed and taken by certain things, wine, especially cooking and different types of cuisines. And I started to become more and more immersed, and started to kind of self-study a lot of these things. And I remember I was working, I was the assistant food and beverage manager for a golf course, which was when I think back now, very, very out of context and very out of place for me. But I remember one night I left work, and we had just tasted all of these incredible wines. And I had a very sort of an epiphany, and I understood that I didn't want to spend my time pursuing a career in performance that I could never be guaranteed was going to materialize no matter how much I worked. It was very much a luck of the draw. Whereas if I learned everything I possibly could about something about which I was equally passionate, I could control the trajectory of my career. So I decided that night that I was going to be a lifer in food and beverage. And and then immediately signed up and started taking courses with Quartermaster Sommeliers and Wine and Spirits Education Trust, and then really dived in head first into spirits and cocktails and things like that.
Yeah, and I do think about too that in the role of bartending and hospitality, there's also certainly very much a level of performance at times
Oh,
too, in
absolutely.
terms of being able to
Yeah,
ham it up.
yeah, for sure. There's a reason that so many people who are in this industry and for whom this is their profession come from performance backgrounds, because whether one is serving tables or standing behind a bar, it's a show, it's a performance, and we all adopt different characters and characterizations and personas when we are in those situations than when we are just at home or we're with friends and things like that. It's funny because I've had conversations over the years with different friends and colleagues. We all have we have scripts, and we have these we have jargons and different words that we use on a regular basis when we're dealing with guests than we would ever use in our personal lives. So it's very much performance, and it's as gratifying. It can be as gratifying for sure as performing in front of a live audience in a theater or in front of a camera or something like that.
Yeah, because I mean, obviously on a busy night in a packed house, you could certainly look at it this way, but also there's just the applause of a guest, like handing them a drink and them going like, holy shit, this is amazing.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
For sure. Yeah.
Well, that's that. Go ahead.
But there's also, I don't know whether it's tied in and from a psychological perspective, but I have found that all people who are really passionate about hospitality and are in the business, whether it's in a restaurant or whether it's in a bar or whether it's working for a brand or things like that, we all share this similar, almost obsessive desire to please people, to make people happy. Not in the sense that we need to be wearing the right thing or we need to be saying the right things so that there's some like an adulation or things like that, but truly wanting to make people happy. Mm-hmm. And it's a common trait that I have found is shared by those who really, really dig this business.
I will second that. It's certainly I identify with that. So you mentioned, I mean, in terms of who you are as your makeup. So like, you talk about Wine and Spirits Education Trust, Bar Alcohol Resource, BAR. It certainly seemed that as I was digging into your background that like, wherever there is a course, Tad just might be there. Is that kind of part of who you are, how you attack a problem? Because I did notice, it seems like there's a lot of certifications and courses in your background.
It's funny. I've always been, I was always a good student. I always tested well. I always appreciated research and study and things like that. So when I was in my 20s and early 30s, I was obsessive about learning as much as I possibly could about everything that I was endeavoring to pursue. And as a decade plus after that, or what I've realized is I needed to do all of those things and get all those certifications to say, look, Ma, I'm good at this. I can do this. And only to forget it, and have built a foundation. But then it just becomes, it becomes kind of the core of everything that I've done since. But a mentor of mine in the industry, somebody who I mean, I was completely infatuated with, and I wanted to follow his career when I was younger. Became as I started to go through some of these certifications and levels, became a colleague and a contemporary of mine. I have been working with him ever since. And I remember I was going to pursue a certain level of wine certification and education, and he stopped me and he said, why do you want to do this? And I said, well, because I need to have those initials behind my, in my signature and on my card. And he said, but truly, why? Because look at what you're doing now. What you're doing now is what those other people are aspiring to do and want to use these certifications to get to the point where they're doing the same work that you're doing now. You're already in it. You're already doing it. So do it and be best and help other people raise to a level, commensurate to where you are. And it stopped me dead in my tracks. I'm like, oh shit, wait a minute. It was like, this, like I had climbed a mountain to talk to this sage or a guru who enlightened me. So since then, I've been pursuing and doing and fighting the good fight. But my I don't know what the word is. My, I guess, major desire or objective or goal has been instead to educate and to teach, while I still learn every single day, obviously, is to share that with the next generations of people coming up within the industry. And that's what I do.
I so relate to that in terms of, and I because I've gotten over it, but yeah, to see people who like, well, I have to have the initials or the degree in order to do the thing. And it's not my rejection of it, but yeah, there is this thing of like, I'm doing it so that my mom and everybody else will know, oh, you're capable of doing it, as opposed to your point of like, you just step into it. And so I think it's kind of how I found myself where I am. I'm a passionate home bartender who taught enough friends how to do this stuff that eventually some people were like, can we pay you to like teach us about this? And I was like, well, that's a great idea.
Yeah.
So yeah, I appreciate that. Do you mind if I ask the mentor you kind of have looked up to and worked with, who is this person?
I don't know. I don't know as though I'm comfortable saying who
fine.
it is, because that person, is an incredible wealth of knowledge on many subjects related to liquid, and I don't know as though I would
Sure.
want anybody knowing that person was saying, "Nah, you don't need to do that. You're come on, you're already in." Because the person is also, still very much involved with a couple different organizations and certification groups and guilds, let's say.
Fair enough. Yeah. So we're also talking about an industry where, the failure rate of business is plenty high and, not easy. So a person, I think, has to be the right kind of crazy and passionate to want to make something. So tell us a little bit about Tippling Brothers and how you came to take the plunge into doing your own thing in that regard.
Well, Tippling Brothers actually was an accidental direct result of another certification and class. I got invited in 2006 to participate in the first ever beverage alcohol resource course and certification. And it was a huge honor to be asked. And one of the other people who was invited to do it is a gentleman named Paul Tangway, who was in his at the time was one of the first real sake authorities in the U.S. and really helped to introduce sake and shochu and things, spirits like that to the U.S. by way of cocktails and things like that. And he and I struck up conversations throughout the course and common interests, and we both understood that we wanted to take what it was that we were each so passionate about and share them with a wider audience and cast a wider net. He was running a restaurant group at the time. I was running a bar and restaurant beverage program at the time. And we had both kind of started getting some press and notoriety. This was like early 2000s. There wasn't a lot going on yet. Getting written up about cocktails and getting winning competitions and things like that. So ultimately, after the course, we decided that we were going to work on this plan to start a consulting company, keep our jobs, but start small. And we put together sort of a business plan and rough idea of what we wanted to tackle and accomplish and what we wanted to share with the world. And then very quickly understood that that we were ambitious and we wanted to really do something and make a big impact. And so I do recall that on December 8th, 2007, so just before Christmas, I quit my friggin' job, and so did he, and we both just leapt and hoped that the net would appear. And before we could even really start putting the word out, we kind of hung our shingle out on the nail and immediately started becoming inundated with business. And we were doing consulting for hotel groups, restaurant groups, independent restaurants. We were being asked to write for beverage media. We did development on beverages and different sort of projects while throwing events and being asked to do the beverage program for events and things like that. So every work just kind of came at us from every different direction, so much so that we couldn't even really kind of hone and define what we wanted to be out of that, what we really wanted to focus on. But it was really pretty incredible. And out of that, we had Tippling Brothers for a decade. And out of that, we also became partners in a restaurant group that had restaurants in New York, Chicago, Miami, and Las Vegas for a hot minute. And those restaurants were Mexican inspired. So from there, developed a really deep love of agave spirits and got to travel frequently to Mexico. And from there stemmed the impetus to write A Lime and a Shaker. So I can, thank that partnership for that. And then also our partnership in a bar called the Tippler in New York, sort of halfway eponymous. And opened the Tippler, and that was just an incredible experience, and remained partners in the Tippler for several years, and then ultimately sold our shares and moved on to other projects.
Wow. Yeah. Talk about kind of just serendipity and things in motion kind of running. I'm sure there's plenty of hustle behind it all too, but
there was a fair amount of hustle, lots of airline points and hotel points as well. But I got to, have incredible experiences, meet just a tremendous collection of incredibly talented, passionate people. I learned so much, good, bad, or otherwise, throughout those 10 years or so. It was a pretty incredible experience.
Wow. I do have I will save it more towards the end where it's more like question and response, but I do have a couple of there are a couple cool things I learned in Lime and a Shaker that I would be interested to pick your brain on for a moment.
Absolutely.
And we can kind of work through those a little bit. So part of what I was excited about is I remember it was the fall of 2015 or 16. I could figure it out, but it doesn't matter which one it is. But I'm sitting in my friend Josh's backyard, and we're already a couple of tipples into to a great day. But I remember him saying, hey, do you want to try some Amaro? And I was like, well, what's that? And so I just remember, of course, like this, you know, you know, bitter, maybe slightly orangey elixir kind of, washing over my palate and being like, I don't know if I like this, but I know I've definitely never tried anything like it before. And a lot of times when I think of bitter beverages, or shoot, when somebody thinks of their first beer, it's often not love at first taste. It's like, it's something you learn to like. But that was kind of the afternoon I tried my first Amaro, which happened to be Montenegro. So I guess I'm curious to kind of start at the beginning, because obviously these elixirs are not new. Can you talk to us a little bit about like the history of Amaro and Amari as a category? Like what do people need to know about it that they might have seen it, they might have tried it, but what does kind of the 101 on that look like?
Okay. All right. Let's boil this down. We'll break it down. First and foremost, Amaro is the Italian word for bitter. So right off the bat, we know everything in this category is going to have at least some level of bitterness. By definition, the easiest way that I have found to kind of define it for people, my boilerplate is bittersweet herbal liqueur, traditionally drunk after a meal. That's kind of the easiest way to simplify and break it down. And it covers really everything from Amaro Montenegro to Fernet Branca and sort of everything in between. The categories as a commercial product, Amari, which is the plural, Amaro singular, Amari plural, have been really the beginning of the 1800s to the mid 1800s is when we saw a proliferation of brands becoming commercially available, mass produced, and that was in large part due to the Industrial Revolution, mechanization of things, the ability to use a base alcohol that was because of column distillation, less expensive, more plentiful, and higher quality. That in kind of combination with increased travel and tourism to Europe, to Italy, and things like that made it kind of a perfect storm for these brands to become commercially viable. But when we really think about these things, we have to go back centuries, even millennia, to ancient Rome, for sure, also ancient Greece, ancient cultures in the East as well, where botanical infused alcohol would have been used as very early forms of medicine. And there was no distillation per se. We're not 100% sure, but let's say in ancient Rome, but there was fermentation. So there was wine and beer like alcoholic beverages, and there were doctors and botanists and philosophers and scholars of many different types, many different natures, who were studying the medicinal effects or kind of remedial effects of different plants from around Europe, but also from other parts of the world, and understanding that when preserved in wine or in alcohol in different combinations, they potentially had different combinations of medicinal effects, and whether that was cleaning the blood of parasites or filtering or kind of flushing organs or things like that. Remember, it was ancient Rome, so there are studies on those things like antiseptic, antipyretic, things like that. But also, there were certain combinations of things that, if taken daily, it stemmed the chronic propensity to turn into a werewolf. Things like that. This is definitely pre-science. But then when distillation kind of really came into being and became much more advanced technologically right around 1000 AD, 1100 AD, and right before we started to see different spirits categories emerge, it was understood that with distilled alcohol, we had a much stronger vehicle to preserve and extract medicinal elements out of these botanicals. So much more study was done, and more kind of stronger concoctions and potations and things were developed. That's also where we start. From there, it split off to gin and to aquavit and to other, but like botanically infused spirits, all containing things that had maybe some medicinal benefit. In the case of Amaro, in the case of bitters, I think what we at the end of the day, a couple thousand years later, what we know is that these things are very good for the digestive system, and whether that is opening up the appetite or helping us to digest, in addition to being very pleasant to drink recreationally, that they're good for the gut as well. And you mentioned a word before, bitter, and you said that you personally, it took you a few tries to appreciate different bitter alcoholic beverages, and that is really the crux of it all. All of these things contain bitterness in some level, whether sometimes very soft, sometimes very aggressive. But bitter is the key to why these things work for our digestion. And bitter in nature, and bitter to humans in general around the world, is not a flavor profile that we are intrinsically programmed to enjoy. It's something that we have to learn to appreciate. So you're not alone. You're not alone in that, and that comes from evolution. It comes from science. In nature, bitter is a warning sign for poison. Bitter, we're not supposed to eat bitter things. Bitter tells us, I'm going to fucking kill you. Stay away from me. So through some trial and error over the course of many thousands of years of civilization, humans have understood that you stay away from things that are ragingly bitter, because they're telling you right off the bat that it's not good for you. But when our brains, when we consume something that's heavily bitter, the brain automatically sends a message to the digestive system saying, evacuate, get everything out, best possible fighting chance at survival. So the whole digestive system goes on overload to expel the interloper. But when we take something that's just a little bit bitter, the brain still, starts to send a message, but it's more like, hey guys, I don't want to alarm anybody, but we could have a little problem here. So let's just, keep our eyes open. And so we start the process. We start to salivate. The stomach starts to grumble. We start to create pepsin in the stomach, and just in case. But we never have to get there. So what it does, in effect, as a sort of side effect, is that it gets the digestive system going, and we either get hungry before a meal, or we digest if we've eaten.
I think expel the interloper belongs on a bottle somewhere, but
yeah, well, high praise. Who wouldn't want to buy a bottle that said expel the interloper?
So, you were talking about we talked about, agave a little bit earlier through Tippling Brothers. We talked, and now we're talking about Amaro, but both of these are things that are very, very ancient in terms of being, that recipes vary regionally based on which agave plant grows, at altitude versus under a tree, et cetera. It's my understanding throughout Italy, obviously different climate zones, regions, and something you mentioned in our pre-tape we can talk to about as well as, global trade and influences, that two different Amari, be that Fernet Branca and Montenegro, or, Averno and Amaro Nannino, these all don't taste the same too. And so part of it is based on what's going in. So as kind of a drill in a little bit, if someone's popping the top on a bottle of Montenegro, what are they going to smell and taste? And why is that what's in the bottle?
That's a great conversation point, and that's something that has always fascinated me about Amaro, about bitters. The fact that they can be iconically Italian, and that they can be hyper regional and really only include plants that grow on hillsides in and around Torino, let's say, or made from different herbs and fruits and things like that in very hot, dry climates of like southeastern or southwestern Italy, let's say. So very regional and dependent upon local ingredients. And they're delicious and highly prized and very specific. But then you have other Amaro brands like Amaro Montenegro. I would also classify Averna as one in a similar category that really amalgamates or marries sort of endemic ingredients or things that would be found like herbs like oregano and marjoram and things like that would be very Italian, with some of those with let's say Artemisia or wormwood that's also grown in different parts of Italy and different parts of Europe. But marrying that with ingredients that do not grow anywhere near the Italian peninsula, things like cinnamon and cloves and nutmeg, saffron. Well, saffron does now, but didn't originally. But ingredients that had to be discovered or uncovered from very different parts of the globe. And to me, it's fascinating because for Amaro Montenegro, which when somebody tastes it, they taste oranges, they taste flowers, they taste nuts and vanilla and cinnamon and cloves and ginger and things like this. Incredibly multi-layered in terms of flavor profile, but it's iconically Montenegro, and it tastes nothing like any other Amaro. It tastes only like Amaro Montenegro, but it took really not for Montenegro. It took travel by one person around the world for a few years to collect 40 different botanicals and bring them back and create what became Montenegro. But for the category, it took thousands of years of global exploration and discovery, in introduction to new cultures and new cuisines and things like that, and trade to be brought back to Italy to be kind of woven into the fabric of cuisines or trade or commerce or things like that, for it to land there, to be able to find its way into find their ways into all of these secret, mysterious recipes. And there's always a lot of secret and intrigue and mystery around Aperitivo and Amaro brands. And it's part of the mystique. It's part of the allure of the brands and of the companies, the families that make them. But I find it very interesting because we think that it's that it's a product of this sort of alchemy of these different recipes. But really, in the early to mid 1800s, when these things became commercialized because of tourism and travel, because of the Industrial Revolution, these were entrepreneurs. These were upstarts who needed to promote their brands and say, my brand is either better or different than my competitor's brand down the street. I'm not going to tell you how or why. I'm not going to tell you what's in it, and nobody gets to know what's in it. But this is what we present. So, many of these were really a byproduct of competitive business too. These secrets.
So at this point, they're like three people in the family who know what the actual recipe is or something. Probably.
Yes. Yeah. I always like to say, in the case of Amaro Montenegro, there's one person in Bologna where it's made. And then there's a guy who lives in Bayonne, New Jersey. And then there's one who lives on the top of a mountain in Nepal. And those three know, they together know the recipe. Completely untrue and totally fabricated, but
sounds great.
So I've had the good fortune of, over the last decade or so, working with more than a dozen Amaro producers and gotten to work with the families, and just been a marvelous, incredible experience getting to know these people. And some, it's shocking who are global brands. I know one brand in particular that is run by a father and a son. I was with the son one day who told me that his father keeps the recipe for their Amaro in his wallet. And I told him, well, tomorrow your dad's not going to show up to work. I am. And I'm going to have that recipe. I will take good care of your father. I promise you. We'll get him his own little island. He'll be very comfortable, but I am going to be the CEO of the company tomorrow because you just shared that information with me.
It's wild and just shows off like how quaint things can be, even when they're likely, running a global brand.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So I think also about the state of that we've all witnessed, but you've certainly had a front row seat to the fast moving pace of the cocktail industry out there. So with so much crazy stuff happening right now, why should people be looking at this these old spirits or liqueurs? What should what should draw people into a category like this? If they are, if they're seeking something new, what should excite them about something like Montenegro?
Well, it's very interesting to me that in Italy, Amaro is drunk after a meal. It's drunk traditionally. It's usually drunk liscio or neat, or with ice, after a meal, almost exclusively, and that's really remained unchanged since the genesis of the brands in the category. It's starting to change now to some degree with Amaro as an addition to cocktails. But for us here, people who are just getting into cocktails, getting into spirits, first and foremost, we know that every good cocktail should have some bitters in it, right? There are certain categories of cocktail or types of cocktail that people kind of start with, and usually those are things like a martini or a Manhattan. I think I can go to Tulsa, Oklahoma, and walk into a bar and ask for a Negroni, and 9 times out of 10, I'll get one now. So we're much more educated. We're much more aware. We're much more gastronomically savvy than we were as a population, even 5 years ago. And there is a desire now for people to want to explore a little bit. Amaro is bitters. It's just bitters that you can actually drink out of the bottle as well, and that you can, instead of using 3 dashes of, use a half ounce or 3/4 of an ounce or more in a cocktail. And they are modifiers too. So, whether it's Amaro or aperitivo or another type of liqueur, when somebody walks down that aisle in the liquor store, like we were talking about earlier, and is sort of daunted by these things, they were all created and created to, and the intention was for them to be drunk by themselves, just be sipped or enjoyed on their own for what they are. But we know that they make incredible cocktail ingredients, and it's a fun sort of journey to take, to use them, think about them in a variety of cocktails, and start to work up from small amounts and have them be modifiers in cocktails to maybe ultimately becoming the base of a cocktail, to then work back around to being able to enjoy them just on their own in a glass.
Yeah, no, that makes total sense. Using maybe Montenegro as a foil, but introducing something else. So for somebody who's looking to go a little bit deeper in the pool, or just kind of, I feel like it is that contrast that in part helps someone better recognize the orange by giving something. So, and maybe we don't need to give them the most unholy of Fernets out there or something, but is there a brand or a style you would recommend? I've got my bottle of Montenegro as an example. I want to have something not like that. Is there a product or two you'd recommend somebody grab, or do a taste or two of at their local bar?
Oh man. I'm trying to think of an analogy here. There are so many brands with so many nuanced flavor profiles that flavor profiles, different levels of sugar, bitterness, alcohol, right. That it just represents this enormous canvas of colors, let's say, but when it comes to flavor, that's really hard to pin down. But I would say, let's look at a spectrum from kind of lightest to most, let's say, most assertive, or least bitter to most bitter, or, it could be kind of we'll just say light to assertive. Let's say that Amaro Montenegro would be at the light end, and Montenegro is a wonderful Amaro because it's a little bit lighter in terms of bitterness. It's got this beautiful kind of beguiling sweetness that hits you as soon as you put it on the palate. But that immediately kind of goes away and is replaced by this very elegant bitterness, and then just whacks you over the head with all of these different flavors, each one that you can kind of pull out, none that overwhelm any other. So really, really balanced, but it's a great user-friendly Amaro. I don't want to say it's entry level because it's not, but it's very user-friendly and it's very appealing to a wide audience. And it's definitely one that I use to help introduce people to the category. And is a cocktail workhorse, for me. Then if I'm moving, let's say down this to the center of the spectrum, something like, I want to stick to brands that people are going to find. Let's say like an Amaro Chocharo, something like that. A little weightier, a little more robust in terms of bitterness, a little more what's the word? Maybe straightforward in terms of its botanicals, but a great cocktail, or a great Amaro to use as, let's say, an addition or substitution for vermouth in a Manhattan, something like that. Then if we're moving to, the opposite end of the spectrum from Amaro Montenegro, We've got something like Fernet Branca, um, high in alcohol, racy, very assertive bitterness, and very low sugar. That is definitely for advanced palates. And when thinking about it in cocktails, the application is going to be very different. I at home I drink Montenegro and soda very often with an orange, and I'll use 2 ounces, 2.5 ounces of Montenegro. I go through a lot of bottles of Montenegro, and it's very sessionable. With Fernet Branca, if I'm putting Fernet in a cocktail, I'm putting a quarter of an ounce in, maybe a half an ounce, because it's very focused, very kind of specific, and any more than that, and it's a Fernet cocktail with other things included, sort of. I do know some really very talented mixologists who can put an ounce and a half of Fernet into a cocktail and really have it be harmonious, and you don't necessarily know that it's Fernet Branca. I am not that skilled myself, but within that spectrum lies the fun, because that's where the discovery is. Because between Montenegro and Ciociaro, you've got Nonino, you've got Maletti, you've got Amaro del Capo, things like that, that kind of flesh out that lighter end of the spectrum. And then between Ciociaro and Fernet, you've got things like Averna, Ramazzotti, Lucano, and a million more that are a little sweeter, a little more viscous, a little darker, richer as well. So you can really have a ton of fun. I think for home consumers, having 1, 2, 3 bottles will cover them in terms of if they want to play around with cocktails, lighter, medium, really assertive.
I'm visualizing a great infographic coming to life here for sure. But I remember like at
trademark hashtag
right.
trademark.
That's right. That's right. But I think, I can think of like the old fashioned rip, the Toronto, I think it is, that has like a teaspoon or so of like Fernet. Yeah. This idea that, based on the grade of bitterness that we're assigning something depends on like how much you want to play with it. So that makes sense. And again, like something simple like Amaro Caldo with hot water, or, and soda, really helping to just open it up to, in fact, that's one of those things I'm always beckoning to people as well, like with your spirits as well, kind of creating your own little mini highball or whatever, like, soften that up, open it up. The burn can be good, but sometimes you need something a little more softer to not always have to torture the palate all the time.
Yeah, for sure. And for summertime, Amaro, and as you said, Amaro and soda, Amaro and ginger beer is a great sort of highball with some lime, a mule. Montenegro makes a great mule, and so do the others as you get progressively richer. Also tonic water. So in Italy, as I mentioned, Amaro is generally consumed only after a meal, whereas aperitivo brands are drunk before a meal in a spritz, in an Americano, and something like that. But the one sort of exception is Amaro and tonic. There are a lot of people who drink Amaro and tonic, and so I'll drink Montenegro and tonic or another brand, and it's really delicious. It's interesting when you compound two things that are bitter. It mitigates some of the bitterness of both and lets other more citrusy flavors and floral flavors and things like that come out. Tonic water in its own right is very aromatic and botanical. Amaro in its own right is already sort of a cocktail in a bottle. So you put these two very simple ingredients together, and you get these really kind of explosive flavors, but they're very refreshing. So it's very easy to make at home. And it's something unexpected. I don't think many people would think to put Amaro together with tonic water, or for that matter, vermouth in tonic. Both work really, really well.
Yeah, and maybe threading the needle for people out there that aren't as versed, if I'm also going to, with some of the bitter elements, cold brew and tonic is obviously a big thing.
Oh
And
yeah.
so for people to kind of, think about if that's your thing at all, that's kind of the what Tad is threading here as well in that regard.
Yes, certainly. And that's a great point. Amaro cold brew and tonic is also very delicious. And another little hack that I like to teach people that's pretty relevant right now is the espresso martini, which is back with a massive vengeance. I remember making espresso martinis in the late 90s and early 2000s, and then they kind of fell off the face of the earth. And then all of a sudden, as of a couple of years ago, are really back in a big way. I can certainly speak to Montenegro, and I'm sure a host of other Amaro brands work beautifully in an espresso martini, potentially as a substitute for the coffee liqueur, if still using, obviously fresh espresso and shaking the shit out of it. A beautiful, beautiful complement to an espresso martini. Again, kind of compounding that bitterness, adding some more complexity and more layers really can make an espresso martini into a very special drink.
I'm sensing a good upcoming A/B test for myself right there. That'll be good. You mentioned a little while ago, you talked about bitter as an opener versus a closer on a meal. And for many people, kind of seeing a Montenegro, for example, versus a Select or an Aperol, can you talk to us about why some of these things are used more traditionally for an opener versus a closer on a meal?
Sure. Sort of in tandem with the idea that going back to the Roman Empire, that there were medicinal wines that were taken to that were taken to help relieve maladies or prevent things. It was understood then that these things also helped to stimulate the appetite. So there was a tradition, even from thousands of years ago, of taking something lightly alcoholic with some bitterness as the first course of a meal to help turbocharge and kick things off. So that part of it is not new, and it's been known for millennia. When it comes to what we would call aperitivo liqueur, or an aperitif liqueur in French, or as the Italians would also refer to some of them as red bitters. So Campari, for instance, in Italy is a bitter. Luxardo makes a bitter. Aperol is an aperitivo. Select is an aperitivo. But they're loose definitions in terms of what makes one or the other. But we can use that same definition that we used for Amaro: bitter, sweet, herbal liqueur, right? But in this case, traditionally drunk before a meal to help stimulate the appetite. So main differences are generally going to be that aperitivo or aperitivo bitters are generally a little lighter in alcohol, generally a little lighter in bitterness, not quite as bitter. They're very often citrus forward, usually orange or some variation, whether it's orange or kumquat or bitter sweet oranges, kumquats, tangerines, mandarins, things like that. And oftentimes there will be just a little more perceived sweetness. And the idea is that it's meant to be light, lively, rejuvenating, and help stimulate the appetite as well. So when one goes to aperitivo, let's say after work, in any Italian city, they order a spritz, or they order a bitter and soda, or potentially a Negroni or an Americano or something like that. So they're, oftentimes they're mixed with ingredients that have some carbonation. So it's light and kind of uplifting as well.
Got it. Yeah. Um, and real quick, because I feel like, at least for coming to you out of the Midwest, I feel like I probably only first saw Select here on our shelves maybe 2 years ago or something like that. So first, shout out to the marketing powerhouse of Aperol for giving the world
Oh yeah,
the
yeah,
Aperol spritz.
yeah.
But for people out there kind of like, okay, Select, what is that? So it is going to be more in the vein of an Aperol, correct? But again, still regional. I think it's proofing. It's bumped a little bit, but talk to us about, are they proper substitutes for one another? And what should somebody know about something like
Sure, sure, sure,
Select?
sure. Um, it's interesting to me because when I was coming up as a bartender, let's say when I really started to get into cocktails in the very early 2000s, I started getting into the idea of using Amaro in cocktails. At the time, I think there were maybe 4, 6, something like that, that were available on the market in total, and that's what you could get, and I had them all. Flash forward, let's say 20 years, um, and there are well more than 100 brands that are available on the market in the US, and hundreds more that are available in Italy. So we've blown the doors open on that category. And mixologists and bartenders know about it. They're darlings of the industry. And now home consumers and home bartenders are absolutely following suit and learning more and more about it. And that's why we're getting more and more brands. The aperitif bitter kind of category is where Amaro was, let's say, 10 years ago. So up until just a couple of years ago, there were really only two brands, and it was really Aperol on one side of the spectrum and Campari on the other side, and that was it. And that's what we knew. Those were the benchmarks, and they're great benchmarks for the category. But now, as mixologists and bartenders are becoming more savvy and more aware of how to use these things, more brands are coming into the U.S. market. Now, many of these are brands that have been around for over 100 years in Italy, but there really wasn't this massive need to export them because nobody really understood what they were. Now they do, and now the floodgates are starting to open up. So Select is an aperitivo bitter. From the easiest way to make a parallel or to have people understand is if you have Aperol on one side, and Aperol is kind of sweet and orangey and mild bitterness, very very light and delicious. Then on the other side of the spectrum, we have Campari, which is much higher in alcohol, much higher in bitterness. Uses kind of different ingredients to really bolster and push the bitterness, but it's more assertive for sure. And those who love an Aperol spritz would not love a spritz made with Campari, most likely. Those who love a Negroni would not probably love a Negroni made with Aperol. Select happenstantially happens to kind of fall right in the middle of that spectrum. So it's, in terms of alcohol, in terms of bitterness, in terms of sweetness and intensity, it's really right in between those two. So I like to say it makes a bigger, bolder spritz and a kinder, gentler Negroni. It can be used for both, but when it makes a spritz, it makes one that's more robust, more kind of savory, a bit more bitter, and it sort of polishes the rough edges off of a Negroni, maybe for somebody who's just getting into Negronis or things like that. So it's an interesting category because, again, there are not that many brands in the market yet. There are probably, I'd say, maybe 20-ish, maybe 2 dozen that I've seen that are pretty readily available. Lots of different flavor profiles in there. And it really, it comes down to discovery and experimentation, and home consumers, especially, understanding what flavor profiles they like the best, how the bases work, because some aperitivo brands are wine based. So you have something like a Cappelletti that's based on wine and then is botanically infused, and it's really delicious. But it's got there's a wininess, there's a sort of a raciness and acidity, because of the wine base, that you wouldn't find with others. But you can't necessarily plug and play that into, if somebody were having a party and it was all people who only knew the Aperol Spritz and showed up with a bottle of Contratto or even Select and said, I'm going to make your Aperol Spritzes, but make them with this. People might, it's going to take a little time for them to say, I like this. This is delicious, because they're used to something very light like Aperol. So, again, it's oftentimes it's a matter of adjusting expectations and being open to trying things that bring different experiences, different essences, different flavor profiles.
I do like that. What do you say? A bigger spritz or a gentler Negroni. That's great, because I think about, my friend that I love to turn out Aperol Negronis for, because Campari is just like, and so to think about, like, how do you kind of stair step that thing so people can, because they might find their way to a Campari, a Contratto bitter, a St. George or whatever, but they need to kind of like have the training wheels to get there, as opposed to like, all right, let's throw you in the deep end of the pool now. So, okay.
Yeah. But then, if you have friends who drink, heavy duty IPAs, and drink, like really funky dark roast coffee and things like that, that you could probably throw them right into the deep end.
It is reading your audience. So you are right. Yes. Yeah. Awesome. That's helpful. So a couple of things, in particular, going back to lime in a shaker, as we start to kind of wind things up right here. Just have one or two questions. You talked about making, at times throwing like a Reposado tequila in with a cocktail to kind of like add some body to it. I think like you talked about to like tone down the brightness. So and I think I mean, I'm really maybe calling on the memory here, but I think it was a cocktail called like the Little Market, the Mercadito. Yes.
I remember it well.
But I feel like it was this idea of, because I feel like sometimes still, for the layperson staring at Blanco versus Reposado, it can still be like, what's the difference here? Obviously, one, the Reposado being aged for a little while, but how is adding a little bit of Reposado to your margarita or to your Mercadito in that place, how is that going to alter the cocktail for the person?
Well, it's going to, let's see, what's the best way? It's going to dull the very sharp point on the pencil a little bit. It's going to just soften the experience out. If it's a margarita, let's say, made with a Blanco tequila and fresh lime juice, it's I hate to use the term again, but it's racy, very vibrant, very citric, very sort of tangy. And then with a Blanco tequila, you're getting what I find to be very, these beautiful herbaceous, grassy kind of flavors. And sometimes that can be a little much for somebody who's just getting into cocktails like that. So by adding Reposado, it just kind of softens it out. That perception of a little bit of wood influence, a little bit of time in a barrel. It brings a little spice. It brings a little vanilla, things like that, and it just rounds out the edges a little bit.
Got it. Yeah. Go ahead.
Actually, since you brought that up, I like to use things like Montenegro to do the same thing for some people. And especially when people ask me, okay, what do I do with this stuff? I say, put a half an ounce of it into any cocktail and see what it does. But especially in a margarita, while it does, it brings this host of flavor experiences and complexity, it also brings a sort of deep, soft sweetness to it. So adding a half an ounce into a margarita recipe and shaking it up helps to kind of soften the bite of tequila and lime juice a little bit. And additionally, it brings, like I said, a little bitterness to help all the flavors pop. So it's another way. So if you make, if you make a margarita with reposado tequila and a little Amaro, like a Montenegro, or a more, a light to medium Amaro, you get some pretty cool results. And I find that people really enjoy it. Oftentimes I won't tell them what I've done because they just won't get it intellectually, or it'll scare them off. But I'll put the glass in front of them and they try it and they're like, wow, this is the greatest thing. This is so cool. This is so interesting.
So I love that level of permission to people, like just pour half ounce and see what happens. Would you be altering your spec at all, Tad? Does it just fit right in there? Would you pull back on your orange liqueur or something like that? Or
I would say split it. If you're using an orange liqueur, if you're using, let's say you're using 3/4 of an ounce of Cointreau or a Curacao or something like that, maybe start with half an ounce of Cointreau, 1/4 ounce of Montenegro. But you could, to make it easy, you could just augment and add on top of that. Montenegro is only 23% alcohol, so it's really a very nominal increase in the ABV of the cocktail, even if you just added it on top as as what people call a floater. Just add in a half an ounce and shake it up.
Okay, that's great. Last question on my end. In the book, you also talk about grandma mix.
Mm-hmm.
So, this is like, it seems like you guys combining equal parts simple syrup and Grand Marnier.
Right.
And so is the marrying of those two things that are the barrel notes, or is there something that's too potent about it in terms of why you're marrying the sugar in there?
Yeah, for me, I love the flavor and the mouthfeel of Grand Marnier. But when combining it, especially with, a fresh, vibrant, bright Blanco tequila, it can take over, it can be the loudmouth at the party a little bit, because yes, the barrel notes, just that incredibly concentrated, perfumey orange note. And it's high in alcohol. You feel it. It's heady. So by taking everything that's great about it and what it brings to a cocktail, but kind of lengthening that with simple syrup, but not, you're not reducing the mouthfeel or the body. It just kind of softens it and lets other people at the party share the dance floor.
I really do like that, because I do feel like it sometimes can be very easy to end up with an overly orangey margarita. And that makes sense.
Yeah. Perfect. And I'm a huge espouser of the Tommy's margarita. When I make them at home for myself and my friends, I generally speaking, it's lime juice, a little sugar, and good tequila, and a shaker, of course.
Sure, of course. Yeah. Tad, this has been great. I really appreciate the time today.
Chris, I appreciate your time very much, and keep doing what you do and sharing the love with your growing audience.
Thank you. I will do that. Hey everybody, thanks for listening. If you liked the interview, the transcript and show notes are located at decodingcocktails.com/podcast. The Decoding Cocktails podcast is produced by Chris Bay and myself, Chris LeBeau. Subscribe to avoid missing an episode, and if you think this is good stuff, share it with a friend or review us on your listening platform. And check out our newsletter, Cocktail Confidential. Remember, the best way to get better at mixology is to practice. And the best way to do that is in the company of friends and family. Happy cocktailing, everybody.